The Apartheid Museum has reopened to the public after closing due to the coronavirus pandemic, and you can now visit the museum from Wednesdays to Sundays as well as public holidays. Emilia Potenza, curator at the Apartheid Museum, joins us for more. Emilia, so can you tell us about the significance of this reopening?
Well, we're delighted to be open again. We opened on the 1st of April, although we were celebrating the opening of our museum today. And we are getting quite considerable numbers. On Thursday this week, we had 841 visitors. About 50% of those are school children. And this is a very important audience for us because it is actually very telling and actually quite shocking how little South African history school learners seem to know. I actually took a group of grade 9s around the museum a couple of weeks ago, and I was very shocked that they had a very superficial understanding of what National Women's Day was. They had a hazy idea of what the past laws were, and only 2 of them had ever heard of Steve Biko. So, you know, it just makes me realize the importance of what we do. Because, of course, it is very hard to understand the present without an understanding of the past and where we have come from, particularly 20th century South Africa and the apartheid period. And it's impossible to really change the future, build the future, if you don't understand the past and if you aren't able to make sense of the present.
So, Emilia, today's event was attended by some important people, but the museum is intended for ordinary South Africans as a reminder of that past that you speak of so eloquently. And obviously we should never forget that past in light of where we want to go in the future. But tell us why every South African, both those who are not as familiar with our past as they should be, as well as those older South Africans who, you know, apartheid was a part of their lived reality. Why every South African should make a pilgrimage to the Apartheid Museum, regardless of the level of knowledge they have about the past?
It's interesting to look at that from the point of view of the mayor of Johannesburg, Councillor Palatse, who was the keynote speaker at our event today. And she has not visited the Apartheid Museum because she has not been able to cope with the pain of going back and revisiting our difficult and complex and painful history. Her visit to the museum today made her feel that the time had come. And I think that that is true for a lot of people of her generation, and she's, you know, a slightly younger generation than I am, and even the older generation, who have felt, as you say, that they lived through that period and they didn't want to put themselves through having to relive it. For younger people, you know, it is something that is more academic, quite hard to believe, but many youngsters say, I cannot believe that my parents never told me about this, you know, I didn't know this, and you know, it's difficult. It's a difficult thing for Black South Africans to not feel angry and bitter towards white South Africans. It's a difficult thing for white South Africans not to feel ashamed and guilty and embarrassed. But this is an important part of the process that we have to go through, because I think to pretend that, you know, it never happened, or that all is well now, and that, you know, we've come out of the apartheid era and we are now in a new dispensation where we are all equal, and, you know, that's a myth. We have to confront our past. We have to go through the process of acknowledging what happened, acknowledging our own parts, even, you know, for young white South Africans who may feel that this happened before they were born. There is an acknowledgement to be made that they benefited from apartheid, and that something's got to be done to give back. And we all need to be part of the process of rebuilding our society.
Emilia, I'm sorry to interject there. We're running slightly out of time, and I really want to hear about that temporary exhibition honouring Archer Desmond Tutu called Truth to Power. Tell us a little bit about that before we run out of time entirely.
Okay, so we launched that as our new temporary exhibition, and it's a remarkable story of a remarkable person, but not only of Desmond Tutu, but also about the role of the churches in the struggle against apartheid. And for me, it was an extraordinary privilege to be able to curate this exhibition. It involved working with his colleagues and friends of many years, people like Dr. Brigalia Bam, Reverend Peter Story, and others, and to tell the story. And for me, there are three important aspects to Tutu's life that really stand out. And the first is his courage and his willingness to defy. That he insisted on sanctions in the face of massive opposition, that he promoted gay rights within and outside the church long before it was broadly accepted, that he advocated for the ordination of women in the church in the face of stubborn patriarchy. The second is his humanity. He was probably the most talented orator of his generation. But his politics was never driven by slogans or the desire for power. He never lost sight of human beings at the center of the story. And that is why he could step in and rescue a person from being necklaced. That is why he could lead the TRC with such grace. That is why he could stand up to corruption.
Well,
and the third aspect...
Sorry, I do apologize. Carry on.
The third aspect is his commitment to contemplation. No matter what the demands on his time, Tutu spent hours every day in private prayer and meditation. His faith was the wellspring from which everything else in his life was nourished. Those are three remarkable aspects of Tutu, that we can take into our lives today as we deal with the challenges of our times. We learn from Tutu's example that in difficult times, we should try not to despair, but take action. And so the exhibition is very much a call to action, a call to for each of us to find how we can change the world, because Tutu did believe that we can all participate in changing the world and building a better world.
Right, so for our viewers, that temporary exhibition, Truth to Power, running at the Apartheid Museum currently. Thank you very much. That was Emilia Potenza, curator of the Apartheid Museum, speaking to us, and that museum is once again open. You can visit between Wednesday and Sundays and public holidays as well.